Okay, welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to share this with you today because we're going to explore a genuinely fascinating psychological profile. Look, we all know the pressure of keeping up our digital appearances, right? But today, we're focusing on the exact opposite. We live in a world that constantly rewards attention and visibility, and we are going to look into the incredible psychology behind people who seem completely invisible online.
So, have you ever noticed someone who just never posts pictures online? Seriously, take a second and think about it. No selfies, no massive life celebrations announced to the world, no daily updates of their breakfast or their morning commute. In our hyper-connected, kind of attention-obsessed digital world, this type of behavior really stands out, doesn't it? It almost feels countercultural to exist today without putting yourself on display.
Now, when we see this quiet behavior, society tends to make a whole lot of quick assumptions. It's incredibly easy to look at someone with a blank profile picture and just assume, well, they must be shy or insecure or maybe completely antisocial. But psychology tells a totally different story. This behavior isn't random at all. It actually highlights a deep level of confidence, mindset, and emotional intelligence. They're grounded, and as we're going to see, highly emotionally secure.
All right, Layer 1, the privacy shield. Let's explore why this quiet behavior isn't a retreat, but a deliberate strategy.
So the foundational concept here is what psychologists actually call a high privacy orientation. Basically, this is a psychological trait where an individual places just immense value on having control over what other people see and think about them. The really key takeaway here is that these individuals aren't avoiding people out of fear or anxiety. Instead, they're actively protecting their mental space. They are very carefully guarding the doors to their personal lives.
And what's truly fascinating about this is the shift from relying on the internet to feel good to finding a deep inner security. While most of the world is trapped in this cycle of seeking external validation, always hunting for likes, comments, and shares to feel a sense of worth, these individuals rely heavily on self-validation. They simply do not need to announce a life event to the entire internet to feel good about it. It's an incredibly subtle but undeniably powerful sign of deep inner security.
Moving right along to Layer 2, the core identity. Let's peel back the next layer and look at the internal foundation these individuals possess.
This brings us to a really interesting term used in psychological research, which is self-concept clarity. Research shows that people who share less online often have an incredibly firm and stable grasp on exactly who they are. They know exactly what their values are, and they're clear on their personal goals. And this perfectly explains why people who share less online have such a strong sense of self without needing any of that external applause. Their identity just isn't up for public debate.
Let's break down exactly what this clarity looks like in practice. Because they know their own values and their own goals so well, they just do not need external approval. Their happiness genuinely comes from within. And because of that strong internal anchor, they are completely unaffected by fleeting trends. Their self-worth simply does not fluctuate based on how an audience reacts to them. They're basically like a solid rock in the middle of a rushing digital stream.
And that ties perfectly into this idea of secure self-esteem. You can really think of it as completeness without the camera. This secure emotional balance means they don't feel that desperate urge to take, 50 perfectly angled selfies in golden hour lighting just to prove their worth to people they barely even know. They already feel entirely complete. Psychologists explain that people with this kind of emotional balance are generally far less anxious, much less desperate for the world's approval, and entirely focused on achieving real-world goals instead of digital ones.
Okay, let's look at Layer 3, the deep thinker. Let's see how this builds into the way these invisible users actually process the world around them.
So the really crucial point here lies in a cognitive trait called an internal locus of evaluation. This basically means they judge their own success and their own worth by their personal standards, not by what society expects of them. They process the world internally, they think carefully before they speak, and they only choose to post when something genuinely, deeply matters to them.
And this stark contrast really highlights their preference when it comes to communication. People with an internal locus of evaluation, they have absolutely no interest in firing off hundreds of fleeting replies in a random comment section. Instead, they'd much rather step back and have one authentic, deep, meaningful conversation in real life. They prioritize real-world depth over digital noise every single time.
And finally, Layer 4, escaping the digital illusion. We really need to examine how these individuals actively avoid one of the biggest psychological traps on the internet today.
Many of these individuals deeply understand what psychologists refer to as social comparison theory. This is that psychological trap where people constantly measure their own worth against someone else's carefully curated highlight reel. The people we're talking about today are highly aware of this digital illusion. They know that social media can completely distort reality, and they recognize the sheer exhaustion that comes from stepping into that arena.
By choosing to stay low-key, they are actively protecting their mental health from that endless, exhausting cycle of comparison, which leads us to a really powerful takeaway. They are choosing peace over performance. Staying off the digital stage isn't an accident, and it definitely isn't a sign of weakness. It's a highly conscious, deliberate choice to protect their peace of mind.
So, to summarize the core truth of this explainer, real confidence is realizing that you do not need to be seen by the world to feel seen by yourself. The next time you notice someone who doesn't post their pictures online, maybe don't just assume they're shy or antisocial. Celebrate their profound emotional intelligence, because they might actually be more grounded, self-aware, and secure than most people constantly broadcasting on the internet.
Which brings us to a final thought here. As you navigate your own digital habits today, I really want you to ask yourself, do you need to be seen by the internet to feel complete? It's a pretty profound question about our true source of validation and exactly where we draw our worth from. I hope this explainer gave you a totally new perspective. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you on the next one.